So to continue, we have Krotz here, Krotz, who is the foreman of the Heart Machine and the foreman of the underground city. He is essentially Friedeson in the underground city. He is not really the doppelganger because he doesn't look like Friedeson, but he is the other side of that personality, that creature, that character, the agent in the underground city. He seems to be reasonably immoral or amoral, given his absolute delight in burning the false Maria. Now, he has no idea, of course, that this is a robot. He has no idea that this is the machine man. He just essentially feels that it's this corrupted woman that must burn, and returns the world to that sort of medieval presence of immediate retribution against an evil character. So there's little to like about him, essentially. He does attempt to stop the revolution. He doesn't understand why the god has actually decided to punish the Metropolis world and bring about a type of apocalypse, which is what Friedeson essentially does. He's very Old Testament God in that way. He brings forth a flood, as you know, and decides that his workers are too wicked to stay. So he decides to sit back and let it all go until he realises what it does. His son must also be part of that sacrifice. But Grote here seems to be almost a priest of the ancient times, one who is fiercely devoted and loyal to Friedeson simply because it's Friedeson, not because of any moral presence. And so he is very much the antagonist of the film and a figure of antagonism. He plays the hands at the end, so he plays the physical self between that in that mediation scene. So he is reasonably important. Now we have this rather ambiguous character, the Thin Man, or Slim, as he is known. He's credited as the Thin Man, we see there. At first, he's obviously works for Friedeson, and his job is to keep Friedeson's son under surveillance, which is a reasonably straightforward sort of issue. We can consider this character to be simply an agent working for greasing the wheels of capitalism and ensuring that it continues. But he does transform, he does change, and he is reborn, essentially. He also represents the priest in Frida's dream, particularly the Tower of Babel dream. He's the centre of morality and the ideal. And so he is, again, a rather ambiguous character, hard to pin down as to what his motivations actually are in this circumstance. But in essence, he is the one who can control people through his ability to watch what they are doing. Now we come to Rotvang, who is a Gothic character. He even lives in an imperfect home, and he lives in a space where there seems to be in direct opposition to Metropolis, but he has asked everyone else to live a certain way. Here he is with his creature, which is birth of desire. He is wanting to rebuild something simply because he wants to be near somebody. His motivations are pretty small, but they are profound. He is also the whole brains of it all, the inventor of the entire thing, an archetypical mad scientist, if you will, and a representation of the manipulation of machinery and man. That glove is synonymous with that idea that is reborn in film and cinema throughout the next century. It's a very common trope that a man who's becoming like a machine physically enacts or becomes physically undertakes part of the body to become like a machine. And that in of itself was one of the concerns of that era. I showed you that Chaplin film of man becoming machine, or man being eaten by a machine. And we've seen in this film that the machines demand a sacrifice. They demand the flesh of the innocent, the flesh of the workers, to maintain themselves and to keep running. And so the oil and blood are mixed. And here Rotvang is synonymous with his creation and with the representation of a new sinister a creature, essentially. And of course, most importantly, we have Frida, Frida Friederson, I believe people do refer to him on the internet, but he's only known as Frida in the film, the mediator, the prophet, the one who the prophecies speak of, the chosen one. He comes from the privileged background and develops that empathetic self. Here's an example that the bourgeoisie are capable of an empathetic heart and an understanding. You can even see there the motion he always does is toward the heart. So there is a great foreshadowing in that he is the heart of the whole system. He's not the heart machine that Krotz initially creates, but he is the one who mediates peace in the end. And he's also there to save people from the flood. So he participates as a Christ figure, as a Noah figure, as a Moses figure. It is very much an Old Testament type of plot here. So I would tend toward those sort of Moses, Noah, Exodus type characters as opposed to, say, Jesus. But the parallels are there. Now, going through his entire sort of plot line, his story, his fall into the darker world, his trip into hell, his return from hell, his choice to go back down there, the way in which he plays on being 11811, all of those things are something that we'll come to terms with in the shape of where he sits in an allegorical self. Is he an individual striking against a corporate self? Is he the individual against capitalism? Is he a representation of the worker? Is he a representation of the middle class? All of those things must come into play. Do we, in the end, make a comparison between him and Winston Smith? Is he our Winston Smith of Metropolis, or is Winston Smith our Frida in 1984? And they are things that we need to consider. They are things we need to understand. Smith, of course, betrays everything that he believes in and everyone he loves and owns, whereas Frida doesn't do that. He stays truthful to Maria, despite the fact that he spends a lot of the film not understanding Maria's motivations when he mistakes the false Maria as being true. He is able to see the falseness now. He's able to see the fact that she is not Maria. And that's interesting because obviously it looks like her. He doesn't look at what she looks like. He looks at her soul. And so that's the kind of thing that we sort of deal with when we're dealing with a character like Frida. So a great deconstruction of his character would be very, very helpful on your part. Take some time to consider where he sort of sits in the whole concept of the plot. It really is his movie, although Bridget Helm is probably the most famous performer in this film. Frida is the one who drives the whole piece and the whole work.